Good evening. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel. We're on the intracoastal here in Wilmington. Wrightsville Beach evacuated yesterday. The mayor telling us there's only about 5 or 6 folks left on the island, along with some media. That's just across the way. No way to get over there now. They're stopping everyone at the bridge. We've been gusting close to hurricane force with this one rain band, and these winds are really starting to make a mark on the power outages. Whoa, right now across the state of North Carolina, we have 132,000 customers without power. That number is only going to go up because we're going to be in this for 36 hours or more because the storm has slowed down. And we're going to get another update, a complete update and a new track from the National Hurricane Center here in the next 20 minutes. Meanwhile, let's go back to Carl Parker in the studio. Carl, already damage, straight line wind damage from the impacts from Florence. When you think about wind gusts over 100 miles an hour, that's going to cause damage. Carl?
Yeah, we've gotten several reports actually up in the upper 90s already, Mike. Mike Seidel is right here in Wilmington, North Carolina, and he's sort of on the periphery of those bands as they're coming through. And Mike, this is just the very beginning of the event. It's just going to go on and on and on and on, and that's what makes this a unique event among hurricanes. Yeah,
some would say uncharted waters down here in North Carolina along the North Carolina coast because they had Hazel, but it moved through at about 30, 35 miles an hour. Also, we had Floyd. I was right across the street when the eye of Floyd came over me at 3:30 in the morning back, I think it was September 17th, 1999. This is a bit stronger storm. It's a larger storm, and it's not coming in from the south and east. It's coming in from the east, and it's slowing down. So that means we're going to have a lot of rainfall. Already, we've had a foot of rain up around Atlantic Beach, over a foot of rain, almost 13 inches of rain, actually. And it's only Thursday night. So we're talking another 24 to 36 hours of heavy rain there. This is all going to move inland, and you can get a sense of the wind. And the other thing we want to talk about, Carl, is the surge. Now, the good news and the best news of the past 3 days is the fact the storm has weakened from 140 down to about 100 miles an hour. That's great, but we still have, that's still very strong winds. It's still piling up the water, as we saw on the Neuse River in New Bern today with a surge of 6 feet in about 4 or 5 hours. So again, even though the winds have backed off a little bit, it's still going to be piling the water up for hours and hours on these beaches and these inland tributaries.
Yeah, exactly right, Mike. And we've got a live picture right now. Go to Mike Seidel in Wilmington, North Carolina. And Mike, we could be talking about rainfall amounts that are higher than anything that we have seen in that region in the record.
Yeah, the record for a tropical cyclone was Hurricane Floyd, hard to believe, 19 years ago. Down in Brunswick County in Southport, they had just over 24 inches. Wilmington had about 19 inches. And by the way, year to date, Wilmington, wettest year on record with approaching 63 inches of rain. So a very wet year here in southeastern North Carolina. Rainfall totals already up to 13 inches north of here up the coast. We've got flash flood warnings just north of here all the way up towards Beaufort, Morehead City, Surf City, in those areas. And some of those continue for another 4 or 5 hours. Band after band coming in. And again, the crux of the problem with Hurricane Florence is the movement. It has now slowed from yesterday, 17 miles an hour, now down to 5, and may slow even further as we roll through tonight and tomorrow. And so as it just festers and meanders and finally, we think, gets on shore around noon or so tomorrow. That's the plan right now. It's just going to drop heavy rain with these bands, very strong gusty winds, knocking out power. Last check, we had 134,000 customers in North Carolina without power. That number is destined to go up as the strong winds and the heavy rain move inland. Pretty good gust right now out here on the intracoastal. We are in Wilmington, North Carolina. We have some protection from the wind, unlike where Paul Goodloe and Chris Warren have been up in Morehead City. They're a little bit more exposed. Wrightsville Beach is behind me, and our wind right now is from the north and northwest, so we're getting a bit of an offshore component. It's a lot windier up on the bridge, by the way, where they blocked everybody from going over. As I mentioned earlier, just a few folks left behind. Well, Wrightsville Beach, year-round population, about 2,500, so it's a small seaside town. Beautiful beaches. They were very wide because they had a beach replenishment project, the Corps of Engineers, last winter. But we talked to the mayor earlier, and he told me he was over there this afternoon, and they've lost a lot of sand already. And you got to remember, we'd only gone through one high tide cycle. We've got at least this one right now, and then 2 more, if not 3 more, to go through into Saturday before these winds shift direction and back off. And that will cut down certainly on the overwash and the erosion. The advantage we have with the floating docks is as the water comes up, the dock comes up. So we're not in any concern here on the floating dock of water coming over the dock. And you can see there's very little wave action. And I noticed the big boats behind me that were not evacuated and taken away are not bobbing around too much because they've got a dock on this side of them, so that's also blocking any potential wave action. So here in this marina area, waves are not a problem, but they're huge, they're battering, and they're destructive out on the coast there, just 2 miles just behind me on Wrightsville Beach. Carl Parker anxiously awaiting the 11 p.m. Eastern update from the National Hurricane Center. Is it in yet?
No. Now, Mike, as I'm looking at this thing, I'm looking at the western side of the eye wall, now about 45 miles away from the coastline there, just south and east of Wilmington. So that looks like, if it's still moving at its present speed and present course, probably starting to get towards Wilmington in about 9 to 10 hours or so.
Yeah, it's going to be certainly after, I think, sunrise tomorrow morning. It's moving so slow, but we're getting some healthy rainfall now. That is really going to be the big story, along with the surge, because the winds, thank goodness, have dropped from 140 down to 90, but they have spread out, as Carl mentioned. So it's a storm that has wider impacts, surge-wise and also rainfall-wise, but really the winds are expanded. In fact, the hurricane force winds now expanded out to about 80 to 90 miles. That was earlier today. So you get a sense of how powerful the storm is and how large it is. It's not a very compact storm. That's the way it was when it was out in the Atlantic. In fact, 2 weeks ago we started tracking this, and it was in a position climatologically where a hurricane had never made it to the East Coast. So this system, Florence, has defied the climatological odds. A big ridge built over the Atlantic and forced it south of Bermuda and right in here towards the Carolinas. Power outages now have jumped from 134 to 151,000 customers in North Carolina. That's just in the past 25 to 30 minutes, and those numbers are going to keep going up. Power's on here in Wilmington and across the way. Lights are still on. That over there is technically Wrightsville Beach. You've got to go across the bridge to get over there. The wave action here is negligible because we're so protected. It's like a cove, and we're not going to get a lot of wave action here. But on the beaches, Carl, no doubt those waves are huge. We've seen the buoys offshore earlier reporting 25, 30-foot waves not far offshore. And those on top of the surge, the wave run-up we call, just eat away at these beaches. So it'll be very interesting when we get back out there Saturday over the weekend to see what's left of these beaches from the Hatteras area all the way down here to Wilmington and down towards down towards Carolina Beach.
Yeah, Mike.
Pretty good gusts there. I'd say over 40 miles an hour and some very strong horizontal rain.
Yeah, Mike, we just got a report of wind gusting actually to 63 miles per hour in Wilmington. So it certainly is stepping up there. And as you mentioned, and what works down the coast, it's going to keep that surge very high over several high tide cycles. And that is certainly going to be an ongoing problem right into this weekend.
And if you think about last week, we were on Dauphin Island with Tropical Storm Gordon, a 70-mile-an-hour tropical storm, but it was all about the speed. We were hit like this for maybe 4 or 5 hours, and then it moved on in, and that was it. But now we're talking about this kind of rain and wind, certainly the rainfall going into Friday night, and even Saturday we could have some pretty hefty bands rotating in the backside of Florence, even though by then it will be inland, we hope. And we can have weakened much more. So it's the rainfall inland, the surge on the coast, the eradication of the beaches, but with the winds dropping from 140 to 90, that is a big help on structural damage as far as wind and taking roofs off buildings. We're still going to have the water coming under these structures as we've seen up on the Outer Banks. Many of these buildings, certainly out on the beaches here, they're up on stilts, they're above the elevation, and they're built that way just because of higher than average tides when you get nor'easters or storms like this. But sometimes you have too much water and too much of the force of the water for too long, and it just eats away, and sometimes you can lose the footing under those houses on the beaches. But right now we're hoping for the best from that perspective as far as wind causing destruction on these beachfront properties. But again, inland, we're getting winds, as Carl mentioned, Wilmington Airport, which is inland, 63 miles an hour. That'll knock down trees and knock down power lines. So a lot more people will be without power in the minutes and hours to come. We've got, David, it's hard to hear. David Baxter, Storm Tracker. David Baxter, Storm Tracker. David, what's the latest from your position in Topsail Beach? Whoa.
Yeah,
wow, what was that? Topsail Beach.
Right, yeah, about the same thing you're experiencing right now with the really gusty winds. At times we get these really heavy duration gusts that last about a minute that go up to about 70 miles an hour. We did have about a 15 to 20 minute lull where there's a little bit of a dry spot in between the bands.
Okay, thanks for joining us, David, up there at Topsail Beach. And not far away, we've got Chris Warren, who's been battered by the winds tonight, like I am right now here at Wilmington on the Intracoastal. Chris, you hanging on up there like Paul Goodlow was. You've had stronger wind gusts up there, over 80 miles an hour so far.
And Mike, it has been crushing all day here with the winds. Some of the strongest winds just the past couple of hours. You've covered so many storms. I wouldn't say countless, but I know that you have counted and you know how many storms you have covered. What is it about this one that really has your attention? Is it the duration? Is it the way it has gone and defied all climatological laws to come across the Atlantic to where we are now? What is it about this storm that has your attention, Mike?
Well, a couple of things. First, as you mentioned, the odds of this hurricane hitting the East Coast from where it formed were about zero or close to zero historically. And so that, we saw it out there over 2 weeks ago. That's not, as we say, that's going to fish out. We don't have to worry about it. But then as the days wore on, we did have to worry about it, and we're dealing with it right now. The other thing is the slow motion of it. It's slowed down because there's no steering. We are in mid-September, but the jet stream is not dipping down. Many times in September when we have hurricanes mid to late September, we have a cold front will come in, a trough in the jet stream, that'll pick the hurricane up, and as it comes up the coast, scoot it out and very quickly. It may impact the coast like Sandy, but it will move faster. As a result, this thing's going to hang around. Bodacious rainfall totals, wind gust over 100 miles an hour already. Thank goodness the winds have come down. That's going to save us on the destructive nature of this hurricane. But again, the power outages are going to impact thousands. Right now, 155,000 customers alone in North Carolina. That number keeps climbing. Chris, back to you in Morehead City.
Yeah, Mike, the winds are climbing a bit here as well. And we were talking about this storm, the water levels, which now if you wanted to walk to the ramp down to the dock, you'd have to walk through water to get to it. I want to go back to Mike Seidel here in Wilmington, North Carolina. And Mike, what do you think? I mean, the storm isn't as strong as it was a few days ago, but it could last so long. I mean, would you rather take it for, 100 miles an hour for a couple hours or 80 for a couple of days?
I think by far from a insurance perspective, 100 miles an hour for just a few hours, because the long-term impact with the erosion and hours and hours of winds over 80 miles an hour just knocks down more trees, knocks down more power. So it's a tough choice, but I go with the 3 hours of 100 miles an hour. By the way, I've just checked my social media. I know a lot of you heard a loud bang about 20 minutes ago as I was tossing to our storm tracker up in the areas north of here, up to Topsail Beach. And that loud bang was a transformer that blew just just very close by. It sounded like a gunshot, and it scared a lot of us, but that was a transformer that blew right here on the intracoastal. So that's what the noise was. Otherwise, what you're hearing is the whistling of the wind as it rolls down the waterway here. We're about 2 miles as the crow flies. Wrightsville Beach on the other side. You can see those beautiful boats over there. They're bobbing up and down a little bit. They are protected, again, by a floating dock like I'm on. Also, remember that the barrier island is blocking those huge waves. Now, out there on the coast, we talked to the mayor earlier today, and he was out there. He said they've already lost a lot of sand, and that beach was just replenished by the Army Corps last winter. A nice wide beach if you were watching us on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday with our coverage of Florence, and he said a lot of that is already gone. It'll be very interesting, and he even brought this up, what the beach is going to look like as we get through Friday night into Saturday as the storm pulls away and the wind field starts to break down. But it's a huge wind field, and now we're getting a lot of wind gusts north of here, between here and Cape Lookout. That's Morehead City, Surf City, in those areas, the Emerald Isle, north of here, the Crystal Coast, over 80 miles an hour. And the big impact away from the coast is going to be those power outage numbers that will continue to rise. And the bottom line, the storm is only moving northwest at 6 miles an hour. So, Chris, the impacts will linger and loiter through tomorrow into at least early Saturday morning here. And we wait and see if the storm goes down the coast and has more of an impact on Myrtle Beach, or drifts southwest and stays north of Myrtle Beach. That has been the debate between the two models, the American GFS and the European model. Right now, the National Hurricane Center is trying to keep it north of Myrtle Beach as it goes inland and stays inland, so we don't have a second landfall.
And Mike, you're talking about that beach erosion, which is what we're dealing with right now ahead of landfall, whether it's 1 or 2. And I was talking to the mayor of Morehead City yesterday, and an illustration of the fact that these barrier islands are transient. They're made mostly of sand. So if nobody lived on there, these islands would move. In fact, there's one, a park just a few hundred yards off shore from where Morehead City is. And he said, when I was a kid, he's been in the city more than 60 years. He says, when I was a kid, the island, it has a lot of trees on it and stuff. It's not a sandbar. It has trees and bushes. He's like, when I was a kid, I used to swim out to it, and it was over there. I mean, and that was, it shows you that if you don't build on something, those islands, they're going to move around. That sand, the ocean comes and takes the sand, takes it away and puts it somewhere else. But we have buildings, we have houses now on these islands, and it is scary to think what this could look like when it's all over. In Wilmington, North Carolina, a storm that's doing stuff we haven't seen, which always scares me because it means that there could be more stuff that we haven't seen. And we talk about the end result of this, whether it's flooding or the erosion at the beaches. It's, you know, if you've never seen something before, how can you predict exactly what the results are going to be?
Yeah, exactly. You just don't know what the end result is, especially with a storm like this. Now, when you have a typical hurricane moving, say, 10, 15 miles an hour, you can kind of take an educated guess. But with this, it's kind of uncharted territory. The good thing is the winds have diminished. Thank goodness. A lot of folks talking about that around here today. They were very thankful about that, but they realized there were still a lot of impacts ahead. Again, the surge, the erosion, the overwash on the beaches, the inland flood threat, which is significant, extreme. National Weather Service, the Weather Prediction Center, rarely puts out a high risk, and rarely for what, 1, 2, maybe 3 days in a row. So that's how extreme it is. Freshwater flooding, river flooding, which will go on into at least early next week. We're going all night. In fact, we're going all night into the weekend to keep you ahead of Hurricane Florence. More live coverage from the coast, more expert analysis from the studio in Atlanta. Next here, stay with us.
Wilmington, North Carolina, where meteorologist Mike Seidel is right now. And Mike, we're still essentially in the early rounds of this battle with Hurricane Florence right now. And I think it's pretty disheartening to hear about water rescues already with this. I mean, it's disheartening anytime to hear about water rescues, of course. But to see that this is developing so quickly, and the threats and the risks that we were seeing with this is coming to fruition so quickly, it's really disconcerting.
Yeah, and remember, this is from the surge. This has nothing to do with flash flooding or river flooding, not yet. I mean, it's river flooding from a different perspective because the wind is blowing the water from the sounds, from the Outer Banks, those sounds, the Albemarle and Pamlico sounds inland. But the true river flooding from rainfall runoff is really just going to get underway over the next day or so and continue into early next week. Some of the same rivers that were hit hard with 500-year floods 19 years ago next week. Hurricane Floyd came through the area, dumping upwards of 20 to 30 inches of rain. And as a result, actually 24 was the top number. That was the record-setting tropical cyclone number on record here in North Carolina. But all that rain in those rivers, like the Tar River, the New River, the Neuse River, that's the river right now we're watching up in New Bern. That is all going to be a problem even after the surge backs off. Because once the winds lessen, that water will tend to return to the sounds. Right now it can't because it's being blown up upriver, and as the tide tries to go out, it can't. So each successive high tide tends to be higher, and we're dealing with, I'm thinking, 3 if not 4 high tides successfully, I should say successively, in this area, where the tide's going to be running higher than average. And remember, it also makes a difference between high and low tide. The difference here this next couple of days is about 4.5 to 5 feet. That's the difference between low tide and high tide on this part of the East Coast. So that would come into play if we were dealing with a typical hurricane that was coming in at, say, 15 to 18 miles an hour. That's not the case. It's slowing down. So really, we're going to have to deal with 2, 3, 4 high tide cycles where the water is going to be running quite a bit above where it should be. Looking around here, the power is still on. Wilmington on my side, Wrightsville Beach behind me. I just checked poweroutage.org, and right now we're up to 164,000 customers in North Carolina without power. No impact so far really in South Carolina, but the numbers continue to ratchet up. These winds now, these winds 60, 70 miles an hour working inland, Chris, and along with the saturated ground will bring down trees and over power lines or bring down limbs over power lines in the next day to 2 days. So, again, lots of power outages, Chris, and we know that Duke Energy and many other power crews have come in to help Duke Energy in this area, and they're ready, and they're stationed, ready to go once the winds back off.
And Mike, you mentioned 164,000 customers without power, so it's likely a lot more people than that. And it reminds me, it's dark right now, and this is a long-duration storm.
Welcome back to Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel in the throes of Hurricane Florence. The outer rain bands moving in here a couple of hours ago. We're getting hit by very heavy rainfall. In fact, now for Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover County, that includes Wilmington, where we're standing, there's now a flash flood warning until 6:15 tomorrow morning. Already some spots, based on Doppler radar, have had 4 to 6 inches of rain, and you can see how hard it's raining right now. This is about an inch an hour or so, along with wind gusts over 60 miles an hour. Up the coast, we've had wind gusts over 100 miles an hour. Cape Lookout, inland, over 80 miles an hour. Power outages now across the state of North Carolina, and basically right here at the coast is where they all are because of the weather from Florence. 163,000 customers. Wrightsville Beach is across the water and over on the barrier island about 2 miles behind me as the crow flies. Those beaches lost a lot of sand today based on what the mayor saw, and they're getting battered tonight, much like we are, but not with a wave action. We're protected here in this intracoastal waterway just inland from Wrightsville Beach. So we don't have the wave action here. We have the rain, and we have most of the wind as the wind is blowing northwest, and that's helping us a little bit here as far as the tides. High tide right about an hour ago. We'll have another high tide around noon, and then about every 12 hours, and it's going to be about 3 more high tides we have to deal with the onshore flow. Again, once the hurricane goes in, we're going to have the wind coming in from the other direction, and that will continue to pile up the water. Right now, it is moving northwest at 6 miles an hour. Very, very slow. If you do the mathematics, it gets into the coast here or nearby sometime around 9 or 10 in the morning. But I've seen systems like this that slow down and they waddle around in fester before they make their move in, or they'll just sit off the coast for a while. And we knew this was going to slow down based on all the models. And the result is that we get these long-lasting impacts. The saving grace here, and thank goodness the wind has dropped from a Cat 4 140 down to a Category 1 90-mile-an-hour hurricane as of 11 o'clock tonight. And Carl, you know, you stare at the radar long enough and it starts playing, it starts playing with your mind and your eyes. But I've been looking at it over the past half an hour. It seems like the storm, the center, is not moving northwest. It's either drifting west or just not moving at all, or maybe even drifting a little bit to the south. But again, you look at the radar long enough and it'll play tricks on your eyes.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mike. I think it is moving more west right now. That's the way it appears, at least in the last hour or so.
We're getting tasting some salt too. It felt like the wind shifted just for a quick second. Let's go to Mike Seidel right now, Wilmington, North Carolina. And Mike, I'm not sure what the water looks like where you are, but it certainly looks a lot different than it has all day where I am.
Well, we've got a different vantage point, Chris. We're not on the barrier island, and we're on this intracoastal waterway, so the water doesn't look a whole lot different. Out behind me, when we have these stronger squalls come through, we do see a few whitecaps, but we're pretty protected from the battering waves out on the island, out on Wrightsville Beach, which is just about completely evacuated. Power's on there and here in Wilmington, but over 160,000 customers in North Carolina here along the coastline have lost power with these 80 to 90 mile an hour wind gusts inland. Cape Lookout had 106 mile an hour wind gust. Rainfall is coming down. It's just pouring down right now. Doppler radar estimates in the area up to 6 inches. The National Weather Service here has posted a flash flood warning for here in New Hanover County, also Pender and to the south in Brunswick County. And that goes until 6:15 Friday morning. So now basically the entire coast from the Outer Banks, from Cape Lookout rather, down to the North Carolina, South Carolina line, Chris, under a flash flood warning. And we're going to see many, many more flash flood warnings right into the weekend as the rains from Florence pivot inland into the south and west. Chris, back to you in Morehead City.
Yeah, Mike, we're really getting crushed right now. We're getting one of those rain bands.